Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today, it's a big one. We're talking about the long-awaited second album from Porter Robinson, Nurture. Oh boy. I was simultaneously looking forward to this one and seriously dreading it. Porter Robinson became somewhat of an EDM legend when he dropped his debut album in 2014, Worlds, which mostly got a muted or ambivalent response from critics, but accrued what felt like the single most intense, insane fanbase I've ever come across for any project in pretty much all of electronic music. When I first heard the project around late 2015, early 2016, I thought it was pretty good. I made a video about it and comparing it to Madion's Adventure album, which I saw direct comparisons to all the time, and I happen to enjoy significantly more. And then this happened. Even though I liked Worlds and rated it a solid 7 out of 10, the fans were absolutely not satisfied with that. They were appalled at the notion that I could possibly enjoy any other existing album more, that I had any issues with Worlds at all, and I didn't consider it an absolute stone-cold perfect masterwork. And I'm not even really exaggerating. Though I think I even got off pretty easy compared to more popular critics like Fantano or Spectrum Pulse, who just straight up didn't find the album to be anything all that special or fit in their particular taste. If you're in the mood to lose your faith in humanity, feel free to go and read through some of those comment sections. The overblown reputation this album had just stuck in my head like a splinter in my brain. And as the years went by and I got to see the entire EDM scene shift to correct to the insane splash that Worlds made, its grand ambitions to change the game becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy, my thoughts built up more and more, until last year I finally couldn't take it anymore and just decided to make a Redux review for it, going through all the much more complicated thoughts I had on the album and its impact, running on for 25 minutes. I do still generally like the album, and get how so many people found it to be such a mind-blowing experience, but I also get how critics were mostly unimpressed by it. Like, I think that album's melodies and hooks are all fantastic. I could easily recall the tune to pretty much every track, even if I don't listen to it or even think about it for over a year. And I really respected Porter's ambition to make this grander artistic statement in the middle of a scene that wasn't really doing that at the time. And I think he did in fact succeed in changing the game with it. But I also think the mixing and mastering is super blown out and hasn't aged that well. Very much a product of its time and only could have come from that particular EDM scene at that particular time in 2014. I think the album has this weirdly self-important attitude that thought it was doing so much more to break from the norm than it actually was. I think it probably could have stood a bit more sonic variety too. Now that it's been almost 7 years since Worlds dropped, I was certainly intrigued by the idea of a follow-up, and really hoped he could properly deliver on the potential he showed before. And I even had a strong feeling that I would enjoy this more given its surrounding buzz, but I was still wary. I hadn't listened to any of the pre-album singles leading up to it that dropped over the course of the past year and a half or so. I just wanted to jump into it and see what we got with absolutely no expectations, so what do we get with Nurture? First and foremost, this does read to me as being very fundamentally similar to his debut. Stylistically and sonically, he hasn't changed much at all. Still making super bombastic melodic EDM that leans fairly heavily on its emotionality, takes all the same influences from the same kinds of millennial indie rock he took cues from before, as well as that cutesy anime influence, that kind of stuff. But Nurture is certainly an improvement in many departments. Nurture does in fact resolve my biggest issue with Worlds, being its pretentiousness and self-important attitude. I can very much appreciate that this album at least knows what it is. It doesn't go for any big, overarching concepts or attempt to highlight how special it is. It just lets its own style speak for itself. Porter is just being himself on this project, sticking to the kind of material that got him so much attention, knowing well that he just occupies his own specific niche at this point and isn't trying to make some kind of revolutionary, game-changing statement, which is only a good thing by my metrics. Also more healthy for him to lessen the pressure on himself. I also think he's noticeably improved on a production level as well. I mean, this project is still totally blown out and has lots of clipping audio everywhere, going for that same sense of giant expansiveness while being as completely bricked out as ever. But it's not like Worlds, where it felt like he was just mastering his album that way because that was just how he was used to doing it, leading to him sounding like his contemporaries on the EDM scene and not sticking out as much to me personally. But this time around, Porter has a much better handle on how to give these tracks the wider sense of space they need to more effectively hit on the level he was going for. These mixes no longer feel like they're collapsing in on themselves, with one exception I'll get to, and his uses of the clipping audio artifacts felt like they had a lot more purpose behind them. Audio fuzz and distortion as a sonic element to actually be manipulated and accentuate his mixes like any other instrument, rather than something that felt incidental to the mixes. I see a lot of progress here. I'm quite happy to see all of that, though I don't think it's an improvement across every department. One issue that I still have is that this album is also a bit samey. A lot of these tracks feel like they're kind of going for the same effect and end up kind of running together for me. There are a handful of more abstract moments that I enjoy anytime they come up, help break up the sound of everything, but there's also no equivalent to Fellow Feeling on this album that really sticks out in that way. And the way this album runs on for nearly an hour, I couldn't help but get the feeling that maybe you could have shaved off a track or two and improved the experience. And perhaps unfortunately, I don't think this album also carried over World's biggest strength for me as effectively. The hooks and melodies here, while good, aren't nearly as consistently memorable or sticky as those on his debut, which might have unfortunately led to this album feeling even samier. Without as solid hooks attached to every track, the formula underpinning many of these tracks ended up getting highlighted more, even if I don't think he actually sticks to that formula as much as he did on his debut. So that made this one kind of a tough one to parse. I think I did get more personal enjoyment out of this than I did out of Worlds. Nothing on here that openly frustrated me like on that album, or any tracks on here I truly dislike, or I feel didn't succeed at what they were going for. And I do think he's come a really long way since 2014. But this project is also not as impactful as his debut. I don't have as strong feelings towards this one, and I don't expect to still be thinking about it to the point of needing to make an overlong follow-up video 4 years from now. Still, it's certain to please the fans of Worlds quite well. They got their wish, as it were. And I think it will provide a more refined and better developed look at the same kinds of sounds that first made them fans. Now, I can't be bothered to do a lengthy breakdown of this album's lyrical content, but I did briefly look over them, and I will say that they do feel a lot more grounded and personal to Porter himself. Songs exploring his own experiences with love and his mental health. There's a running theme of him using this music as a way to encourage himself to keep going on with his life and help deal with depression. He's definitely opening himself up a lot more with this project, showing a lot more vulnerability. I don't have anything to complain on the lyrical front. He clearly cared a lot about everything here. Though that is gonna make me feel bad about the tracks on here that didn't leave as strong an impact on me, because I can tell every one of them, really meant a lot to Porter himself and will mean a lot to all his fans. Yeah, I do not love every track on this thing. I think the project has a really strong first half, and kinda slides off for me a bit in its second half. Right around the track Sweet Time, that's typically the point at which my attention kinda trails off. Generally speaking, the lesser cuts for me were just the ones where Porter just follows the usual formula you expect from him. Tracks like Sweet Time and Musician and Mirror, they're all quite nice. They hit on the level you'd want them to. And the latter two also grew on me a little with each successive listen. Mirror did have that cool self-aspirational angle to it that I thought was quite nice, and sort of a bouncy John Hopkins-y house beat. Also, I think Musician is Porter's own favorite track on this album. He sort of built the tune out of an unreleased track he did with Kiro Kiro Bonito. But, I don't know, these tracks didn't really pull me in as much as other tracks on here. And, also, I have no idea why the track Blossom didn't hit for me all that much. It feels like it really should. It's just this super stripped back melancholy guitar ballad where I think Porter is kind of doing a duet with himself. He pitches his voice up and modulates it so that he would sound like a girl on several tracks on this thing. But yeah, this track, it does really sonically stick out in the track listing. It feels very well placed in the greater context of the album, and you can tell just through his performance that it was a tough one for him to record since he put a lot of emotion into it. He wrote it for his actual girlfriend. This should be one of my favorites, and I'm assuming it probably will be for most people, but I don't know. I'm not sure. For me, it just felt like it was kind of there. It left me weirdly detached for reasons that I just can't put my finger on. Maybe because it sounds like he's doing a duet with himself and the lyrics don't really call for sounding like multiple voices or singing, since it's obviously just written from his own perspective. Though, I don't know, that feels really nitpicky. It's certainly not the only track like that on this album and didn't bother me anywhere else. And it's not like he doesn't make it obvious that the two voices on this track are just copies of each other. I don't know what my deal is. Maybe I just don't have a heart or something. It's still a good track, just not one of my personal favorites. And I had similarly mixed thoughts on the penultimate track, Unfold, featuring totally enormous extinct dinosaurs, though I can better pin down how I actually feel on that one. Like, you know how I mentioned earlier that Porter had a better command of space and didn't make the mixes sound like they were collapsing in on themselves, with one exception? Yeah, this was the exception I was talking about. The part of me that is turned off by audio clipping in general does not care for this one. Like, holy crap, what if this producer who already bricks out his sound all the time decided he wants to intentionally brick everything out times 20? Turning what might have been an ordinary epic Porter slow burn into this near incoherent wall of sound that feels like it's physically tearing itself into shreds along with my headphones. I could have sworn I even heard some amen breaks in there, but I couldn't totally tell since they're obliterated into white noise. But on the other hand, I can't bring myself to say I actually dislike this track. First of all, it's clearly being built up as the album's giant climax point, just with its placement as the penultimate track, and those experimental noise elements that squeak in near the end especially make it clear that, no, Porter very much intended for this to be a borderline noise piece with epic melody to match. Sort of works on a similar level that maybe some of those early M83 projects do. I mean, it's not my aesthetic of choice by any stretch. I mean, like, Dead City's Red Season Lost Ghost is probably my personal least favorite M83 album. But I can certainly respect what Porter was doing with this one. It can be a bit much, but I can tell that's the whole point. Now, there were tracks that followed the usual Porter Robinson formula that could really hit for me. For instance, Look at the Sky. That one has by far the best and catchiest hook on the album. Makes for an excellent album opener that pulls you into the sound and aesthetic of the album really effectively. Might be my favorite track here. Something Comforting probably had the second best hook on here. I really like the more fast-paced energy it brought. Get Your Wish was a really consistent highlight with the way it used its pianos, took a few less predictable turns. And Mother was also a major grower. Didn't find it to anything special on first listen, but the more I hear it, the more it just seems to pack a lot more punch and weight than most tracks on here. And of course, I mentioned before that this project has a handful of more abstract cuts, and it should be no surprise to hear that all of these are personal favorites of mine in the track listing. Do Re Mi Fa Sol La Ti Do was supposedly inspired by Porter having discovered the music of Cornelius. And while I'll admit that I've only actually listened to one of that guy's albums myself, I do think Porter made a pretty cool nod to him with all the playful and plucky guitar lines he implements on this track. Created a nice, cheerful mood. Dullscythe had all these chopped up pianos and drums and stuttered them into oblivion without really forming any kind of tune. Thought that was some nice experimental fun. Lifelike, despite being a less than 2-minute album intro, still surprisingly hit for me as this little uplifting low-key piano-driven piece. And the 6-minute wind tempos. If that track had some kind of like grander payoff moments like the industrial section of Fellow Feeling, that would almost certainly be my favorite track in the bunch. But I still feel like the chill vibes it delivers through the use of all these breezy piano licks, which almost sound pulled out of LCD Sound System's All My Friends, and the way he sort of trades them off with these strange, like, vocal chop excursions, like, kinda had me wishing that this project did more stuff like it, without really caring about typical pop structures like that, or putting more focus on these kinds of tracks to make them seem like more important moments for the album. But I do still think the album is definitely all the better for their inclusion. Oh yeah, and I also forgot about the album closer, Trying to Feel Alive. That was a really solid way to go out as well. Nice, breezy, and nostalgic and cheerful, bouncy, house-ish tune. Hits the right emotional note I'd want an album like this to finish out on, even if I do think it ends really abruptly. But, yeah, that's everything on Nurture. Very nice stuff here across the board. May not be in love with every track, but even the lowest points on here I'd probably be able to get into pretty easily out of context. I will freely admit that, yes, I do not love this album as a whole. I don't think it's gonna rank among my personal favorites of the year. While it was a minor grower, as I repeatedly listened to it over the past couple of days, and not one that I ever got outright sick of, it also did not really get me excited to listen to it more and more, or had me itching to go back to it and replay it after I was done. The album has a lot of attention to detail from a production level, certainly way more than his debut did. But I wasn't getting a lot of new insights out of it with more revisits, and even though I typically prefer longer albums, I did kinda wonder whether all 14 of these tracks were fully necessary to include. But I'm sure none of the things I've complained about with this thing are gonna bug any of Porter's longtime fans. Fact remains, I do still probably enjoy this project a little more than his debut. I appreciate how he scaled his sound back to something more humble and relaxed and introspective, but still delivering on pretty much the exact same core appeal that got him such a massive fanbase to begin with, pouring a ton of emotion into every track, and even noticeably furthering his production skills. If you loved Worlds, you will love Nurture. I think that's pretty safe to say. And I may not love it myself, but it did significantly soften my thoughts on this artist who I previously felt way more conflicted on, and I definitely got enough out of it to give it my recommendation to anyone who thinks they might like it in general. So, yeah, I think I'm overall feeling a 7.5 out of 10 on this one. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters, they're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list or make me review something, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So that's all for today. See you next time.
Maybe it's